takes pleasure in attracting a stellar list of speakers that address today's most relevant issues. The club's place as a refuge for rich discussion and networking has never wavered after 123 seasons.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Anita McCuitt, and I'm president of the Canadian Club Toronto and national leader of tech, media, telecom, and consumer markets for PwC. We always say that life is short and there's no time like the present. These sayings gain new meaning for John Ruffolo in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. While recovering from a life-threatening accident, John opened the doors on his newest venture with $500 million in secured investments. He joins us today to discuss what pivoting looks like during the pandemic and the importance of resilience at every stage of business and of life. Before we hear from our speakers, here's some information about how you can participate with us. The click here to switch stream button is available to you if you find that your internet is slow. The video quality may decrease, but the audio should stay strong. And we do want your questions today, so just click the questions tab, type in those questions, and they will go straight to our moderator. Thank you to today's event sponsors, PwC, National, and Tories. The Canadian Club is a nonprofit, and we've been gathering people together for 124 years, and it's because of our sponsors that we're able to continue to do so. Now to introduce today's speaker. John Ruffolo is founder and managing partner of Maverix Private Equity. John's focus is on guiding the strategy of the firm, his role as chair of the investment committee, and his deep involvement with sourcing and leading opportunities, particularly within the technology industry. John was also the founder of Omers Ventures and the co-founder and vice chair of the Council of Canadian Innovators. Today, John will be joined in conversation by general partner of District Ventures Capital and star of Dragon's Den, Arlene Dickinson. One of the club's traditions that has not changed in this virtual world is a toast that we make to our country at the start of every event. So if you have a drink nearby, maybe coffee, water, join me in a toast to Canada. To Canada.
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 Arlene, I'll turn the Canadian Club podium over to you.
Thanks so much, Anita. And it's such a pleasure to be here. John, I just, I feel like we talk a lot and we haven't seen each other much lately, but I think of you as such a dear, dear friend. And it's such a privilege to be your friend. I feel like I'm one of the very few people who can count on their hands, people that have influenced my life in a meaningful way. And you have done that for me. And thank you. Before we get into the conversation and the questions, I want to just thank you. You've been such an inspiration. And I can't wait to hear the answers that you've got to these questions, because I always learn so very much from you, as I know this audience is going to learn from you. So thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you so much. It's absolutely a privilege, Arlene. Not only are you a dear friend, it's a long overdue conversation between the two of us. And one of the great pleasures I have in doing this, it just feels like you and I hanging out and chatting about the world and trying to solve all the world's problems.
Well, we both laughed when they asked us whether or not we could fill the time, and I said, "You haven't heard John and I talk. We can talk forever about everything and anything." And you're right, we try and solve a lot of problems. But I want to get to a few questions. And listen, you have the word pivot. We're talking about how do you pivot through uncertainty? How do you deal with life and the challenges that are thrown at you? And John, you've endured a horrific accident. So I'm going to start there because I think everybody wants to start there and wants to ask you, A, how are you doing? B, what that impact that had on you? And then kind of as we go into the conversation, do you believe that when you pivot professionally that you inevitably also pivot personally? Mm-hmm. So tell us how you're doing.
I mean, physically, I'm fine. I'm healthy. I'm strong. You wouldn't know that I was in a horrific accident. Certainly not from looking at my upper body. Frankly, you wouldn't even tell from looking at my lower body because my muscles are intact, and we can discuss it. But what actually almost killed me, my passion for cycling is actually what's resurrecting my body. And I have to tell you, it's almost fascinating to watch almost from the outside on how your body reacts to such a catastrophic accident that, I'm surrounded by the best doctors in the world. And at the end of the day, they don't understand what's happening inside my body. And as somebody has said to me on several occasions, spinal cord injury is equivalent to a snowflake. Every accident is different, and there is no pattern to recovery, and there's no pattern to what's going to happen to you. So talk about pivot. You have to pivot every single day because you actually have no idea what you're running into.
And so thinking about that, when that happened, you were right in the middle of fundraising. You were starting to fundraise for Maverix. You had this vision for building a fund unlike any other in Canada. Accident happens. You have to pivot personally, but you managed to persevere through all of that. And from the hospital bed, continue to raise capital and get your fund across the finish line. Yes. So I'd love to talk a little bit about, as you would, John, as only you would, you fought back and you continued to take your place on the stage in Canada. But tell me about what that journey was like, because mentally, we all know how hard it is to be an entrepreneur and to raise capital. How did you do that?
Yeah, and frankly, that wasn't my only pivot during the fundraising process. It was the hardest one because it combined a physical pivot as well. But if I just take the clock back a little bit, when I had left OMERS and had this vision, and the vision was developed really over the course of several years of observing where the market was going to go. And really thinking about it closely. When shortly after I had left, I was working already on a fundraising strategy with another partner. It fell through despite me thinking that there was a partnership there, and I had to restart it all over again. And it took me about, I think, 45 minutes after finding out that potential partnership was not going to happen. And, I've seen it all the time, more so on the other side of the fence where entrepreneurs constantly have to keep on at it. And what I used to say, and now I've had no choice but to live it, is that I would be identifying those entrepreneurs that had a passion for solving a problem, and that anything that came in their way, they would bounce against it and pivot around it, because they weren't chasing money, or they weren't chasing a very specific glory or what have you. They were going to go through all ends of the earth in order to solve this problem. And I wanted to solve a particular problem for the lack of capital at a certain area for entrepreneurs. So when the first disappointment occurred, it was like, okay, but the problem is still there and I'm going to still solve it. And then I got traction again and was thinking, okay, I'm going to close again and life is good. And then we get hit by COVID. And it was pencils down. It was pencils down for 6 to 8 weeks. And again, disappointment settled in. And I never, ever thought that we were not going to raise it. But again, here we go. And just before my accident, as we were starting to see the glimmers that on the other side of COVID, the world was not over. Well, I got hit again, this time physically by a truck. And I do recall about 4 weeks or so later that, and I knew that I was, able to survive. I never thought once about not raising the fund. And again, the reason is I'm not chasing money. I'm not chasing glory. We got to solve that problem for Canada. And I knew that we were going to do it. And, perhaps the stupidity of me and the stubbornness, my doctors did not appreciate that I was on my back in the hospital bed with the overbed table with spreadsheets of my calls with prospective LPs. And they were looking at me like I've just completely lost my mind. But I knew it was going to happen. I just didn't know exactly when. And again, it's reinforced my view that any entrepreneur could do anything that they want, but you better be doing it for the right reasons, because these obstacles might come at you pretty hard. And unfortunately, I had probably one of the worst obstacles that I would never wish on anyone, but it has not changed a single thing about achieving the objective that I set out to achieve 2 years ago.
Which I find just so, that's that resilience and that iron will, the ability to kind of let things, no matter what's coming at you, not impact you in a way that stops you, I think is the hallmark of any true visionary. I think anybody who, as you said, who has a goal in life. I mean, I remember sitting across from you when I was raising my fund, District Ventures, and I sat from you and I said, here's my vision. Here's what I want to solve for Canada. And you immediately understood it, got it, and supported the vision as opposed to, well, how much money are you going to make? And it started with the problem you're trying to solve, which I think is such great advice, because we can get so hung up on chasing the wrong things. And true vision is about making a difference, right?
And I'll tell you, ignoring the accident for the moment, when you get hit with these roadblocks, there is a very easy and thin line between getting depressed about it and then versus getting determined and getting angry to say, you know what, you're going to keep on going. And boy, was I ever on that line. But I never ever crossed it. And I really do believe of mind over matter. I've always believed that. What I didn't understand was once I was hit, that mind over matter really was the beginning of my recovery. And I remember the moment I was, aware of my surroundings. And that was probably, if I recall, about 6 days or so after my first couple of surgeries. The first thing that one of my doctors said is, just imagine you on a beach walking and moving your body. And at this time here, I had nothing moving. And I'm like, oh my God. And I mentioned this story earlier. My first waking moment was actually in the hospital room. I was awake beforehand, but I had a tube in my mouth, so I couldn't communicate. And I was on heavy meds because the pain would have been debilitating. So I'm in the room for the first time, and I was at a funny angle on the bed, and there was, the bed spread over me. And I finally woke up. I was by myself, and I looked at my legs, and I can't feel anything. And it was like, oh my God, they removed my legs. You couldn't see it. And I just thought, oh, really? Like, I don't have legs now? And then my next reaction, quite honestly, was, well, I've seen those videos of those Vietnam and other war vets with no legs, with the wheelchair, and doing pull-ups and all this sort of stuff. And I thought, God damn it, if they can do it, I can do it too. So here I am imagining, how am I going to get around with no legs? And what was kind of funny, the nurse comes in, and my voice was still a little bit hoarse because the tube just came out hours earlier. And I couldn't say the words. And I said, so they had to, and he's like, what? And I go, my legs. I was making the noise of a cutting. And she looks at me and she says, what the hell are you talking about? She gets the remote and angles me further up. She goes, your legs are right there. And I went, oh, I got legs. And let me tell you, I was thrilled out of my mind. Like, oh my God, they're there. They weren't working. There was no feeling, no nothing. But I thought, okay, I got something here to work with.
I love that story. I mean, that is quintessential John, like that only you would, and it's such a rare thing to be able to see the positive in any situation. And for you to be able to think about that, well, hey, I've seen people who've, gone without legs and managed to get through, and I'm going to do that too. I mean, just that attitude is so fundamental to any sort of pivot, because you don't pivot if things are going well. Right. You don't even think about pivoting. You're going, oh, things are going great. And that's exactly when something will hit you. And if you're not ready or thinking about what's going on in the world, you can't actually then imagine what could be. So when something does happen, you're probably like deer in the headlights. What do I do here? Right. It's completely different for you.
Well, but also, like, what choice did I really have? Right. My only choice really was to feel sorry for myself and sulk and think about all the things, that I might not be able to do again. And I didn't go down that path. But like I said, on spinal cord victims, there is a very, very high proportion of them that do fall in there. And I completely understand how easy it is. But I must also say, where you try to look for the small wins, and you also look at folks, your close friends and family around you, and you get strength from them. And one of the big strength moments was the first night back when I got home, and so I was supposed to have been discharged, I think, second week of January. And I basically said, screw it, man, I'm not missing Christmas over this. So I overrode my discharge, which did not go over very well with the hospital. And I just said, I'm going home. You're not going to stop me. So I go home, and, truth of the matter was probably a little bit earlier than I should have, but I didn't care, because seeing my kids and being in my home was a big psychological difference that I didn't have in hospital. And, let me tell you something really, really odd and could have, stunned me. And all I was remember was the Talking Heads song, where, is this my house? Is this my wife? Well,
Yeah.
Arlene, you know what happened is I have a beautiful home that I've had for 16 years. It's 3 levels. And my wife had to prepare for my return back home, but there's no elevator in the house. And there was no way for me to have any sort of semblance of normalcy. So we had to move. And we were going to move temporarily into a condo, maybe for a year because it has the elevator, and then figure out what we're going to do with our life. And lo and behold, on the same street that I live in, I don't know, 15 doors away, was a tear down. And my wife just randomly happened to look at the real estate listing, and it had an elevator in it. And we just said, buy that house now. And we did. And so we're on the same street in the same neighborhood. We didn't want to impact the change in our kids' lives. So I left the morning of cycling in one house, and I arrived in a completely different house with the same furniture. And I kind of walk in, and let me tell you, I don't wish that on anybody, but I'm kind of looking around in this house, and I have no idea what it looks like. And we then go to the dinner table, and the conversation, though, was the same with my kids, about how was school and, the little normal things. And then my wife and I had to tell my kids, look, we have something. And by the way, because of COVID, I wasn't able to see or touch the skin of my kids for 3 months. Like, talk about, like, just pile it on and punch me in the face, on top of it. Right. So seeing my kids for the first time in 4 months, brand new house, at the dinner table with a different table because the other one didn't fit. And then saying, okay, kids, we don't know how to tell you, but I was expected to die. I was expected to die on impact. The trauma to my body was so great that I should not have survived. And in the first 48 hours, the doctors did not expect me to survive. And I didn't have surgery until 36 hours later because the impact of the surgery would have been another trauma to my body and would have definitely killed me. So we tell this to the kids and just say, in case you hear about that. And the kids kind of with their mouths full and, no, we didn't think you were going to die. I was like, well, what do you mean? He says, Dad, you've had so many bike crashes and other things. I mean, Arlene, you remember what my other big bike crash that, at top speed in the biggest hill in the province. And I got up and just walked away from that. And they just said, you did it before. We just figured you'll do it again because you're kind of, they didn't use the word invincible, but sort of said that. My wife and I just kind of looked at each other and went, oh, okay. And then we just moved on. And then what that kind of just taught me is just like I can't let the kids down if they think that their dad is invincible. And yet they don't need to know all the massive insecurities, the pains, all of the issues. And then I just kind of realized all that stuff is just noise, but I'm having dinner with my family and kids.
Well, it's such a great lesson because no one pivots alone. No one.
Right.
You need to have your team. And first of all, I just want to take a minute to say, Karen was absolutely stellar through all of this, helping find that home, getting everything organized and making sure that you could have some semblance of normalcy when you came back. And so your wife and your family have been so supportive. I just think, when you think about pivoting and you think about you need the personal support, but you also need professional support. How has the team at Maverix helped you to pivot, helped you to build the fund to where it is right now?
Yeah. So this is a great point. And I would say this for the entrepreneurs. it really takes a community to help you pivot. Just like when they say it takes a community to raise a child, it's no difference in raising a business, and it was no difference in mine. So aside from my family, there was two categories of community that really were critical. One were my friends, and in particular, I'm a member of a cycling team called Les Domestiques, and our tagline is cyclists who serve, and we really serve the community. And many of the folks who are a member of that team are well-known business folks, some of which were on that little video that I just saw on there. Mm-hmm. These are very, very busy individuals, and I love them dearly. They dropped everything, and they separated themselves in approximately 7 sub-teams and broke out all parts of my life, like financial matters, housing matters, accident investigation, food for the family, etc. And I couldn't believe that they took over all elements of my life, and there was about easily 30 or 40 of them. I couldn't believe it. I still can't. And then there is the Maverix team, which was absolutely critical. And Mark Maybank, my co-founder in particular, not only is he my partner in Les Domestiques, he's like a brother to me, and he basically took the whole team and calmed everybody down and basically said, what we're going to do is we're just going to freeze Maverix until John recovers. So he knew I was going to recover, and they called up all the investors, they all the constituents, and in fact even spoke to the press on my behalf just to get the message out of, we'll be back. Yep. We're not going to stop doing anything. We're just not going to add anything. And that was absolutely critical because it bought me time to recover. And I have to say, and this is where it gets really incredible, when I then started making the investor calls, almost every one of them said, John, hey, don't worry. First of all, what the hell are you doing calling me when you're in the hospital bed? But after we got over that, it was, hey, we're going to back you. You get better. You wait. Just chill. And I was like, whoa. Every single one who had said that ended up being our investors. I find that absolutely fascinating. I find that very Canadian in that we're such relationship driven. So when you look at all the constituencies of the community and, defined in the broadest sense, that is the reason why I really came back, because I would not have blamed them if they said, you know what, you've gone through too much. We're just going to have to get on to the next thing. My team could have easily have done that, and I would not have blamed them. But I found it absolutely fascinating that no one left my side. And, I will never, ever forget that. And again, for any of the entrepreneurs that are going through the same thing, there is a tendency to isolate yourself and to start, even perhaps feeling sorry for yourself, but having everyone come around you. And it was really the first time in my life where I really hated to ask for help from anybody. I just generally not in my character. Boy, I asked for help. I needed help. Yep. My family needed help, and they all came rushing in. I just can't forget it.
Yeah, John, I mean, that being vulnerable is actually one of the the most strong things you can do as an entrepreneur. Being vulnerable and looking for help and getting help and asking for help, I think, is so critical. I mean, I just somebody asked me to ask you which of his partners is the most handsome. Somebody, Wasserman? I think that was a loaded question.
Yeah, he's got the best hair, that's for sure.
That's it. Okay, he gets the best hair. I want to just turn the conversation quickly though to some pretty pointed questions about Canada and where we sit politically and what do you think is going to happen? You know, how well the country can pivot. So you've said you want to build 10 more Shopifys in Canada. I mean, you've gone out and said that. But what needs to happen for that to happen? I mean, more importantly, what's in the way in Canada stopping us from building 10 more, 20 more Shopifys? Yeah,
you know, and it's not me building, it's me being a part of building, supporting the building.
Right.
So, you know, and we're really in a delicate time right now too, in that, you know, we're watching the rest of the world open up and, you know, and I know it's very, very complicated, but we're also seeing the evisceration of small and medium-sized businesses that form the backbone of this country. And you thought that the health issues associated with COVID were bad. This is going to be something that we've never seen. And I think that the impacts of this period are going to last for a long time. What it also has done is, you know, a lot of the very, very large companies in the world, you know, in most of them being American, and we know the names, whether it's Amazon, et cetera, have gotten so much stronger, really at the cost of our more local entrepreneurs getting hit disproportionately hard. And so we really need to come out of this COVID, and it's great where we're seeing on the vaccination, you know, programs, but this is really a call to look, folks, we got to get this economy back rolling, and it is a health issue if we don't. It is not a binary issue. This reminds me of the interview that Harry S. Truman said after he was no longer U.S. president. And I'm going to paraphrase here, where the interviewer asked, so why did you end up dropping the bomb on Hiroshima? And he said, to save lives. And it was like stunning. And it's like, what do you mean by that? He goes, well, we did the calculations of what a full out, you know, ground war would be. And it would cost, you know, X number of millions of Japanese lives, X number of millions of Allied lives, et cetera. And we made a calculation. And both choices are terrible, but it's not a zero, it's not a binary choice. It's a comparative. And it's the same thing with COVID. And I'm very concerned that we have an opportunity to now reset and identify those industries or opportunities that really could scale from a global perspective and really be the future of this country. And you look at Shopify as an example. Shopify made the choice very early on that they wanted to go public. And I remember speaking to Toby, and it was actually our first conversation over coffee, this is when I fell in love with the guy. Here is a guy that immigrated from Germany and basically said, I want Shopify to stay in Canada, be a Canadian company. Yeah, we'll be global and have people all over the world, but we will stay here. And I just can't, it was a small company at the time. And seeing that ambition and going public, and the going public really meant the opportunity to stay here. So when I look at that and I start to say, okay, how do we get more of these Shopifys to think that way? Well, right now in particular, you have the United States with more capital than anyone's seen in the history of the world. And the capital is basically for free. And in Canada, we're capital constrained, and they're coming in here and they could basically buy up anything. And it makes it very difficult for an entrepreneur not to sell out earlier. And it's not a criticism. It's just a mathematical computation where they think about, Jesus, they're paying me 3, 4, 5 years forward. How do I say no? Well, the way to say no is if the community around them, and I can only speak for the financial community, if we could write very large checks, the equivalent of them going public and keeping them here, and then helping them from global scalability. That's what Maverix is trying to do. And it is a hole in the Canadian marketplace. We have a great venture capital ecosystem. Like, if anybody criticizes, let's have a discussion what it was like 10 years ago when I built Omer's Ventures. It was like zero. It's amazing now. We have a great private equity ecosystem here, but it's virtually all buyout opportunities. Where is that check coming from on the growth opportunities for a variety of industries, not just the technology industry? That's the whole. And I would like to be just one part of the community that gives them a reason to stay here. And I am a homer. I am a Canadian, and I proudly will say it. We have the best entrepreneurs in the world. That's not just hyperbole. It is true. Maybe we don't have enough, but we can compete against anyone in the world. They just need also a little bit of cheerleading. And when you hit the bumps in the road, having that patient capital say, don't worry, just chill. We'll get around that, as opposed to chastising them on the first barrier that they run into.
Yeah, I mean, I love that conversation. I want to just ask a more pointed question then, based on what you just said. Is Canada's economic, political, and social environment conducive to pivoting? Does it, you've touched on it a little bit, but is it built for pivoting? Are we really a country, because of the structure we have socially, economically, politically, built for pivoting?
This is a very complicated question, and I think you and I need some wine when we go. But
not as bad as the next one I'm going to ask you.
Yeah. I would say to you, when you look at, so now let's talk about public policy. So you are cornering, so I won't escape that question. I would say that my view of public policy from an economic perspective, let's just push the social policy to the side, is to get out of the way.
Right.
And what does that really mean? I'm going to use the analogy, and Arlene, I'll use your background of a farmer. Okay. And I think they're the perfect analogy. The role of government is to get the land so that things could grow. So getting the infrastructure to the land so that folks can irrigate, getting the right fertilizer situation so things would actually grow, providing, if they have the opportunity, to till the soil there. And the biggest thing is helping pull the weeds out. The weeds are the red tape and the things that get in the way. And then get the hell out of the way. Allow the farmer to choose the seeds. Allow the farmer to harvest them when they think it's right to be harvesting, and letting them grow and letting them sell the food anywhere in the world. And the role of the community, i.e., like me as an investor, we're equivalent to the rain or the sun. It just helps them grow faster. That's all we're doing, right? And so I would say that in a time like this, do not be interventionist as a government, and stay where you can actually play a role, and not trying to think you can pick winners and losers, etc. But also when I say get out of the way and picking the weeds, and I'm going to use one simple example, and let's just use the acquisition of talent. Well, it is already brutal if you want to try to find talent outside of Canada to bring into Canada. In many cases, you just can't, and that's fine. They'll stay, whatever country they are. But let's use the United States, for example. Well, pulling an executive from the United States when our tax rates are the second highest in the world from a marginal rate perspective on an individual side. Like, who are you kidding? You just can't do it. Or where you try to attack capital gains taxation for stock options, and I'm going to talk particularly in the tech sector, what are you doing? You want to grow these businesses, and yet you're hurting the very things that actually help it grow. And so I think that there's a lot of misguided policies, all out of, people are not trying to do the wrong thing. But where I get very frustrated is looking at the strategy. Canada, from an economic policy perspective, I will say, has no strategy. Our strategy seems to be appease everyone in every single province so that people, don't get up in arms. But when I look at the United States and say China, and they're going after this crazy fight over who's going to be the AI leader, the patent leader, what have you. I mean, there is a strategy going on. Whether they're executing it well, who the hell knows? But it's a strategy. If our strategy here, and now through COVID, it's telling you a lot about where the digital world is going. Well, we need an economic strategy that aligns to that future of where we're going to be. Canada is not able to compete otherwise. We're too small of a nation. We're so spread out over geography. We can't do the same old things that we've been doing since the post-World War II. We really need to reshape. And by the way, is it hard? Oh my God, it's hard. But for God's sakes, let's have, and this is a nonpartisan comment, because both parties have been terrible at this. Have a strategy, live and die by that strategy. Oh, and by the way, if you're out of power, don't worry about it. Find jobs in the private sector. I'll hire you, for God's sakes, because you're trying to do the right thing. But don't get so worried about what the public and the votes. Just do the right things and live by it. And that's what really frustrates me the most.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that so deeply, John, and I'm sure the entrepreneurs on this call feel that, because you can get your dreams so easily tampered down in Canada, because it's almost like, you don't dare dream big because big isn't possible. Well, of course it's possible, but we have to have the pathways open so it is more likely to happen, right? So I'm going to ask you one final question. I want to turn to our last 10 minutes to the audience questions. But given what you just said, if you had one piece of advice for the federal and provincial governments, just one, about how they can support entrepreneurs as they navigate post-COVID landscape. So we're coming out of COVID. Entrepreneurs are, have been through hell in the last year, as everyone has. Yeah. But what's that one piece of advice to federal and provincial governments about how they can support entrepreneurs as we navigate post-COVID?
Yeah, I would say the one thing is entrepreneurs are the backbone of this country and the backbone to the future of this country. Period. End of story. Okay. Even during COVID, when you start to see the policies, and again, the folks are trying as hard as they can. I get it. Like, so many of them are my good friends and I love them dearly. But we have eviscerated largely the small business entrepreneurs, particularly in the hospitality sectors. And yet, in some of these large foreign-based multinationals are able to sell their wares and continue going on strong and even becoming stronger. And when we think that economic policy is predicated on getting jobs by foreign-based multinationals at, some, basic wage, and we think that's good, like give your head a shake. The only future we have is to bet on the small and medium-sized Canadian-based entrepreneurs, okay? In priority to any foreign base. And not to say, be anti-FDI, because that's what people start jumping on. That's not what I'm saying. US is proudly buy American. Where the hell is the buy Canadian? And let's support it, as opposed to not seeing what you're doing to them, right? And aligning your policies to support them. I'll go back in the hospitality sector. Yeah, you know what? There was a high risk from a COVID perspective. We should have gone disproportionately to support that industry and not eviscerate them the way that we have, whether it was from the rent support or what have you. And when COVID is over and we're going to look around and see the economic destruction around us and kind of wonder, Jesus, what the hell happened? I'm glad people are safe, but we need to move on as a nation. And so I would say aligning our policies all the way through to be very consistent, to be pro-Canadian, and again, having fairness in taxation policies. Fairness means fair for everyone. And it's not meaning fair for the demographic that's voting for you. And one of the last things I would say, and I think we're getting into a little bit of a dangerous place on fairness. We're going to have to pay for all the subsidization that we have. And this was an unusual event. It cannot be paid by the very, very small number of individuals who make disproportionately large dollars. Most of them are entrepreneurs, by the way. And the math just doesn't work, but it sounds really good from a vote's perspective. And one of the most troubling things that I've seen, and my background is an international tax practitioner. 20 years ago, it was a massive amount, at least in my little world, of high wealth individuals moving their assets offshore. And when the tax rates were moved down to be more fair, not cheaper, and it's still progressive, but fair, people stopped that. I have never seen the conversations of people being so frustrated to moving assets offshore. And at the end of the day, these are not huge numbers, but it's saying something about unfairness. And this is not Canada to do that. Canada does think about the broadness of its constituents, but we're in a really unusual time. And I think using the old weapons that you thought worked before are not going to work again. So anyways, I'm going a little bit of a diatribe on there. But I think it's a
big question. Sorry.
Yep.
It's a big question, John. And I'm just aware of our time. So can I ask you a few questions from the audience? And maybe because I'd like to get through them, maybe just give me, as brief an answer as you can on each one so we can make sure we address them all. Can you share with us the best advice you've ever gotten, both in a business sense and in your personal life?
The best advice? Wow. I can share with you the best role model for me who constantly gives me advice, and it's David Suzuki. So I'm the vice chair of the David Suzuki Foundation, and David and I could not be more different, particularly from an economic policy perspective, and yet we're best of friends. And what he's really taught me to do is that when my head gets too big, and he just reminds me of what really matters. And, every so often he needs to remind me because I'll say something stupid. And I'm like, oh yeah, right. And, he'd be thinking about your kids, your grandkids, the environment when, him and I go fishing and, just reminding me to think again of always the small things. And so after my accident, what I've really learned is that after him telling me this for 15 years or so, it really is the smallest things that really matter to me. Having a cup of coffee with a friend, just having a conversation or helping the homework of my children is giving me the greatest pleasure. Not necessarily all the fancy stuff that I would love to do and get on a plane and go see a great sporting event or a concert, which, things that are fine. But it really has taught me that I don't miss any of that stuff. But boy, did I ever miss hearing my kids yelling at one another. Oh my God, did I ever miss that? I never thought I would, but first time they were yelling, I was like, oh, I'm back to normal on here. And then I'd say, kids, shut the hell up. Yeah.
Well, and also, what another turn on that advice is to the answer to the question is what I heard you say is you can't surround yourself with people who think like you. You have to, in order to expand yourself and expand your horizons and think about what's possible, you need to talk to people who have opposing views to yours, who give you a different perspective, right?
You know what? That is a topic that I always talk about. And, when I just had mentioned from a public policy perspective, my dearest friends in politics are both liberals and conservatives. I don't know as many folks who are NDP, but I admire them so much because they're trying to change the world. I may disagree with your policy, and you're absolutely right. Arlene, the other thing I would just very quickly say is the art of debate and arguing has been hit really hard.
Right.
And I love to argue and debate. It doesn't mean I'm right, but that's where you find these great ideas, as opposed to looking at what political spectrum you are belonging from and immediately attacking without listening. I would say, that is something that I greatly support and something that I will continue to do.
Yeah, I love that, John. Okay, two last questions. This one I think is a very a really great question. What specific thoughts and or advice do you have for entrepreneurs with disabilities? This is both for the visible and invisible disabilities. Yeah,
well, I have to say, I never really paid attention to this until I've joined it. And there is nothing stronger than looking from the same vantage point. I have to look up to everybody now as I'm in a wheelchair. And I got to tell you, the first incident for me when I just kind of realized what I have been missing all along, I was about to go into a taxi that has a ramp, and I go up in the ramp, and it was in front of my house, and it was blocking one lane of traffic. We're talking for 60 seconds.
Yeah.
And I didn't think the driver could see me. And then I made myself visible, and the guy was leaning on his horn. And my taxi driver was being very cautious with me because I think that they just don't know how brittle I am. There's actually a disproportionate number of people think that I have a mental disability as well by virtue of being in a wheelchair. So I turned to the guy and the driver, and I basically said to the guy, "Look, I'm going to come and roll there and beat the shit out of you if you don't knock it off." The driver, completely freaked out, but the taxi driver was like, oh my God, this guy is about to jump on somebody. And it's kind of funny. The taxi driver actually all of a sudden had a different impression of me of like, oh, hey, you're stupid and doing that. But, oh, you're normal. It's like, for God's sakes, like, dude, you heard me. And there was this one lovely woman who's she's a tech entrepreneur. And she sent me a note on LinkedIn, and the note kind of made me cry. And it basically said, "Oh my God, John, when the article came out, finally we can be seen and heard." And it brought me right to that incident. And I'm like, oh my God, I know what she's saying. You're not seen and heard. And let me tell you right now, if you think that I'm not still filled with piss and vinegar, I got another thing I'm going to tell you on here, right? They are an unbelievable economic contributors, and it's up to us in the community to welcome them in. And I tell you, the other thing that really resonated with me and hit me really hard, Rick Hansen called me up one day, and we were just chatting, and he was looking for an update. And he said, "Hey, what's this fund that you're raising?" And I explained it to him, and he said, "John, you have an obligation to help us." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he just said, "How many people in the C-suite have you seen in a wheelchair in your entire career on Bay Street?" And I thought about it, and it was 0. And he said, "Exactly. I am going to change that. I have changed that. I want the folks who are in the wheelchairs, or who other folks that feel like they're dismissed. Hey, you know what? We are here to kick ass, and we will show what we have. Like, we're all in this thing here together. And if I could just do one thing for the entire community that's disabled, is to really awaken that economic force so that they can just enjoy the same parts of being in the community as we all should." And I intend to do everything that I have before to make sure that actually happens.
Well, John, we started off talking about how important it is to have a cause and a vision, and to not focus on money, but to focus on outcomes that are meaningful to yourself personally, to your community, to your country. And we're ending on that same note about how you can actually use all the things you're doing to not just continue to make a difference in our capital system in Canada, and how growth capital can come through Maverix, and how we can change the face of the nation by making sure businesses are successful, but also how you can, through doing that, also make a difference to being a voice and being a face for people who have visible and invisible disabilities, and who need to have a champion who can actually stand up for them. And when I say stand up for them, I mean both physically and virtually. And so I thank you so very much. You are a true Canadian. We are so fortunate that you are here and that you're continuing to champion business here. So thank you. I always love our conversations. I could talk to you for hours. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Arlene. I really appreciate it.
Back to Nita, I think.
Sure. John, I'll echo that. Thank you so much for joining us here today at the Canadian Club. I think your story of resilience and the power of positivity was just so inspiring. And we certainly wish you every success with Maverix. And I do hope that you find the next 3 Shopifys.
Yes.
And Arlene, it's always wonderful to have you join us. And thank you for moderating such a great chat today.
Pleasure.
And guests, we hope that you'll join us for some of our upcoming events. On Tuesday, June 1st, we'll host Alberta's Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation, the Honourable Doug Schweitzer, for a conversation on how Alberta plans to address growing and diversifying its economy as they move past the COVID-19 pandemic. And on Thursday, June 3rd, we host a discussion on Indigenous leadership in business, featuring Tabitha Bull, Clint Davis, and Matt Jameson, as they discuss increased Indigenous participation in the economy, improved industry Indigenous partnerships, and the opportunities that are provided as part of Canada's revitalization and growth efforts. Thank you again to PwC National and Tories for sponsoring today's event. Our events would not be possible without our sponsors, so thank you for your continued generosity. Thank you to our AV supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications and LiveMeeting.ca for making it possible for us to come together virtually today. Guests, thank you for joining us. Please stay healthy and stay safe.